The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hello, everybody. This is Brian for Breaking Down Security. Before we get started, a little addendum here. We did this interview the first of the month of March, so the first weekend in March. At the time, Washington State schools and the other areas that our interviewers came from were not completely locked down yet. That changed as of the 13th of March. So what you're hearing is what would happen in a pre-coronavirus world. What we have now is complete shutdown. The threats and landscape has changed quite a bit. Most organizations are trying to move to distance learning or work packages sent home via email. So I'm not saying there's less security, but the security has changed a little bit in terms of the threat landscape. So just keep that in mind when we discuss various facets of this interview and the one that happens next week as well. Okay, thanks. Hello, everybody. New week, new Breaking Down Security. I'm Brian Brake. With me, as always, is Mr. Betcher.
What's up?
Not too much. Miss Berlin is out this week. Let me see. So let's go ahead and get started this week. We are here with three people. We have three people. It's very rare that we have this many folks on the show. One that I know because she's spoken at the InfoSec Campout last year on disaster preparedness items. Another gentleman has been very active in our Slack as well. And I do not know the third person. So we're going to invite everybody to introduce themselves. We'll start with April, get a quick bio and talk about it, the topic we're going to talk about this week.
So I'm April Mardock. I'm the CISO and operations manager for Seattle Public Schools. We're the largest district in the state of Washington. We have 104 schools. We have about 53,000 kids, 11,000 staff, and approaching 100,000 managed devices.
Goodness.
So we're pretty big. And we have challenges. We have threats pretty much full-time, any day of the week, some from inside and some from outside.
Right on. Nathan, go ahead.
My name is Nathan McNulty. I'm the security architect for the Beaverton School District. We have a little over 41,000 students, 6,000 staff, 56,000 Chromebooks, about 10,000 Macs, 20,000 iOS devices, and another 4,000 PCs with one security person.
Wow. Okay. Jared, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm across the way from Nathan here in Oregon, so Bend, Oregon, and I'm an engineer. And that's the day job. I do part-time work doing pen testing and red teaming. And I'm in Marcus and Jen's Tribe of Hackers red team. And we've got about close to 19,000 kids, 4,000 staff, tons of devices, and no security staff. So.
Okay. So if there's a theme going on here with the three people who've introduced themselves. I think a little background on this. There's been a lot of talk in the news about schools getting ransomwared, and I had been talking to people who, and there was one story that I had seen. One of the local schools here had been ransomwared in the little after Christmas, and they said, "Oh yeah, we got back up within a few days." And I was like, I wonder how that process works for a school that's been a subject of ransomware, and some of the challenges that they have to see before, during the incident, and after, of course. And we haven't done a good incident response discussion or ransomware discussion. We're kind of we're paralleling all of that this week. So and all of you, okay, so a little background for myself. I went to a school where I had 60 people in my graduating class. The way this was set up was small, medium, and large. I think it's probably medium, somewhat husky, and like super large for in my experience, coming from a rural area. I cannot imagine how a smaller school district is actually doing anything. I know Jared said he's got about 19,000 kids. I'm fairly certain that a lot of the schools that I went to rurally probably have less than 10,000 kids, and they don't have dedicated IT personnel at all. So, let alone security. So, I may actually reach out to some of those folks later on and find out exactly how they're planning on doing anything. April, so you have a security team.
Well, I have 1.6 FTE, sure. We have a very lightweight, dedicated security team. I'm supposed to be managing all of operations as well as cybersecurity. Goodness. So I have 18 direct reports that are doing things like network and telecom and wide area network stuff, data center even. I have one full-time security engineer, and I share half of a library analyst that doubles as sort of filter and security support in that context. So although I am large, we really, if you look at comparatively, the security staff I have versus any other normal organization of our size, it's pretty sad.
Yeah. Why is it like that? And considering the climate of, schools, I guess, are now considered somewhat of a soft target. Has there been a change in the last 6 to 8 months? And I'll ask all of you, with all the ransomware that's been on the news, discussing soft targets like hospitals and schools, has there been a change in administrative thought about, the need to increase this, the number of people who are helping with security?
I do think some districts are actually adding security people that didn't before. Pretty sure Salem Kaiser was looking at that, and I think there are several others in our area that are considering it. Mm-hmm. Bellevue up here near Seattle spun one up. So I think there is an awareness and an interest in trying to provide those resources, but it's expensive. One of the things that we're starting to do is to work together kind of at a grassroots level and do intel sharing and supporting each other, because we're trying to make do with minimal staff.
Okay. Jared, what does Bend, Oregon look like for you after, are you using the media reports and articles as, hey, we need more help, or, hey, we need to invest in X technology? Are you doing any kind of work like that?
I think so. First off, we've got that small grassroots, like nonprofit thing that, Nathan, myself, and April are involved in the OPSEC EDU group. And that's kind of like just a grassroots ISAC thing that we built. And so that's super beneficial, one, for that knowledge sharing, as well as kind of building security people and building a small community catering to the specific issues in education. Lack of resources and finances being the general bit there. But out of that, it's kind of been nice, because when people share in that group, I can kind of compile that, top 5 greatest hits for that week, right? And send them off to stakeholders, as you would think about it. And so that started to just slowly increase the dial there on the stove and turn up the heat to where it's like, okay, this is not just once a month or, once a week. Now it's several times a day we're getting reports of this happening. And so that's how it's going to come on our radar.
We're also seeing that that's raising the awareness of the managers and the executive teams and the senior management of the school districts, seeing that, wow, there really is direct threats that can be clearly documented, and there are solutions, and maybe we should be applying resources to it. I think we're seeing that visibility raised.
Okay. So Nathan, you work over in Beaverton. I'd ask you the same question. Have you seen the same thing that Jared and April are seeing, or is it different for you?
Yeah, so our journey started a little earlier due to a BEC that we prevented from happening. So we started almost 5 years ago when we had a compromised account that was trying to basically wire transfer fraud, right? So that kind of started us on our journey, I think, before a lot of school districts were starting to get hit with this kind of stuff. So I think the awareness has gone up significantly. The problem is they're not entirely sure what to do about it at this point. Kind of when you're jumping into security, you don't know what you don't know. So they're thinking user awareness training, like where do we even start with this? What kind of staffing do we need? And what does all that look like? And I think that's where we're really struggling right now.
Right. So you said it was a business email compromised, or BEC. you said it was wire fraud. What, I mean, schools don't have that much money anyway. How are they, it's not like, hey, I'm the principal, please wire $10,000 to this country, this bank in China. I can't imagine that actually made it and worked.
We had a $680 million bond. We were building multiple high schools, middle schools, elementary schools. And of course, everybody's proud that they landed the projects, right, for their bids. So we had a roofing vendor who actually posted on their website that, hey, we won this contract, right? So they got compromised and actually started that back and forth and kind of tried to work their way in. I accidentally stumbled upon it. And then the very next day, actually, I had disabled the rules and was starting to work on investigation. And Southern Oregon University got hit for, I believe it was like 2.1 million.
What was your job function at the time that you discovered it?
Yeah, so I was the Office 365 admin. So I managed all of our email, SharePoint, all that fun stuff. So I was actually investigating something completely unrelated, had to do with mail rules or inbox rules, kind of thinking something with event forwarding was going on. And when I hopped in there, I saw some rules that were like, whoa, wait a minute. So that kind of started our security journey right there.
Oh, okay. So the bad guys had gotten into your Office 365 and set up mail rules to forward things to other people?
Yeah, so they compromised the roofing vendor and then replied in the existing chain, I need you to sign this document. When they went to log in, it was a different DocuSign page. So she gave up creds, and it was the same creds, obviously, that she was using for the district. So they were able to hop into her mailbox and then basically back and forth trying to create a paper trail with a wire transfer. Right. But the joke was kind of on them because we don't do wire transfers, or we're just old school. So, yay.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
So to your point, it's millions of dollars in construction invoices that they're trying to scam.
Right. Yeah, I was like, wow, that's hurtful, man. And that's taxpayer dollars because, they got that put on a ballot initiative. People voted yes or sometimes no. And they, that's taxpayer money that's lost. So let me see. I've got some.
Well, I think a good interesting thing to what Mr. Betcher asked. Nathan's role at the time was not security, but now it is, right? And I think there's a critical thing that all three of us, April, myself, and Nathan, can get behind. And that's when you have somebody like Nathan who's clearly talented beyond their current role, and their boss takes note of this, right? And sees this and sees Nathan's passion and grows Nathan into a position as a security architect. That's kind of a big piece to what I think our mission is trying to figure out how to stair step the people that are passion driven into security roles.
Right. Yeah. So I was trying to form this question in my mind earlier. So I've worked at auditing hospitals, and one of the things that administrators will tell me is, well, we can't implement those controls, or we can't do that thing because we're trying to save lives. What is the excuses they give you when you tell them, well, we need to implement this, and they go, well, we're trying to educate kids? Is that what they try to tell you? Or is it like, we don't really understand what you're trying to tell us? It's some kind of mystical voodoo. What kind of excuses do you get? Or I promise they're not gonna hear you. So nobody listens to the podcast anyway. But what kind of excuses do you get from school administrators or people that are holding the purse strings?
I'll go on that. It's the classroom instruction is really important. So we don't want to make impacts to classroom instruction. But another thing to keep in mind is we are a business. We do have a business office. We have HR. We have all those different functions, and they operate very similar to any other business. So when we're impacting those, we're impacting their ability to do their work. I think you asked a great question earlier that had to do with why we don't make investments into security positions and security controls in general. And those funds are getting pulled away from a classroom. So as administration, we're focused on ensuring good education for our students, and we're deciding to take teachers out of a classroom in order to do some of these things in some cases. And so they're making their priorities that rather than, a security thing that they're not entirely sure what that's actually going to get them.
Okay.
And I will also argue it isn't really an excuse, but the teachers that we hire are amazing, empathic, supportive, helpful people. That's what you want in a classroom. They're also amazingly helpful and supportive to the bad actors that try to fool them.
Right. Yeah. During the ramp up for this, and when April reached out to me and said, "Hey, we should come on the show," and I was like, "Yes, absolutely," because Mr. Betcher's got a few kids. I've got a kid. They're all in school still. The new hotness in the last few years is everybody gets a laptop, because they can do things on it and, watch videos and educate themselves in distance learning and what have you, and write papers and stuff, because, it levels the playing field. Some people, may not have the ability to get computers because of financial situations or certain circumstances. So it's great to give the kids and enable the technology and stuff like that. But then you hear stories. I was actually looking fairly diligently, but I could not find the story about kids who are bypassing those security controls. April had something just about, being able to bypass that, and there's YouTube videos. With a hostile environment, only, bad guys trying to get wire transfers, and you've got, Billy and Jimmy and Jane who are trying to, bypass your security controls. What are you doing to ensure that they are trying? What are you doing to try to make sure that they're secure?
I can take that from the start. Is you've got to practice safe computing with your students and your staff, right? Mm-hmm. So there's how they hurt themselves and hurt you as an organization as a result. If you allow them things like local admin rights, if you allow them things like the ability for their machine to harm others nearby, because you've set all the machines to the same admin password. So if one machine's compromised, others can't compromise. If you aren't microsegmenting your network so that an attack that might be successful on a teacher's machine can't spread to student machines, there's a lot of layers to that game. It is more than just controlling and managing what the students are doing to try to get around the system. It's trying to make sure we keep them from getting exposed to hostile content, whether that's hostile content to them as individuals, like preventing them from getting to how to create suicide videos, versus hostile content that might be, malware that could get through. Okay.
Jared, what are some of the things you're doing at your organization to help? Do they get security training? Do kids get security training at your school, or how does that work? It's like, you got an adult telling them don't push that button. Well, they're going to push that button. So, what are you doing to try to dissuade them from doing so?
We've got a 1-to-1 program, and they do get trained on how to use their device. So for us, luckily, we've committed to the iPads, which we did this way before, the security things were really starting to come to fruition. And so that has been nice with the MDM, our management system, to be able to lock that stuff down for students, as well as, we almost operate like an ISP when we backhaul traffic and stuff at this point to try to keep kids within that filter. And so I think, to what April spoke about, doing those basics, it sounds so easy, but I think it's really difficult. And kind of like segueing or tying that together, I think a teacher's goal is remarkable. And if you ever want to see a group set be able to spin up shadow IT faster in life, you will encounter no greater group set. They are forced to be reckoned with, and rightly so. They're trying to educate kids. They're passionate about that. Mm-hmm. And that kind of bumps up against, really viscerally security, right? Because if you turn off a feature, say in your G Suite, and that feature, that teacher, or their 5 teachers at a school were dependent on that for their curriculum that they had developed at the beginning of the school year, and now you're turning it off in February, well, you really upset some folks, and they're going to do everything they can not to be mean to you, but to still accomplish their task. And I think we're still grappling with, is security, is it really an honest conversation to have, or is this just more bureaucracy that you're slathering on top of me to slow me down as a teacher? Is kind of what my perspective is there.
Right. I mean, it seems like at regular businesses we see users that would similarly rebel if things like local admin were not allowed on their boxes because, for whatever reason they are, they want to be able to install software or what have you. Have all of you, and depending on your technology stacks, have you disabled local admin or administrative privileges on those boxes? And, how easy is that to do and to maintain? Nathan?
Yeah. So we are in the process of removing the remaining admin rights. What we did, we've never had full admin rights for everyone, but what we did do at one point when we were cutting IT positions was that we allowed staff to go through a training. It added them to a policy that allowed them to make themselves an admin through a self-service portal. And then they were able to be admins on their box at that point. And so it's a fairly limited group, but for that group, we're pulling the remainder of that right now. So it's a difficult conversation. I think your point to technology blew up on us way faster than we could keep up with the one-to-one, and they very much underinvested on the IT side because they wanted to spend it all on the devices. So bringing that all back under control has been really, really difficult without breaking things.
Okay. Jared, you said you were using iPads. I at least here in the Snoqualmie School District where my daughter goes, she has it's not a Chromebook, but it's it is a Chromebook. It runs Chrome, but it's not like, the Google Chrome Pixels or anything like that. So I always considered those to be fairly secure and stable platforms, but I guess that there's ways to get around that stuff as well. How does it work with something as expensive as an iPad?
Yeah, so an iPad, you use your MDM. There's several players in the game in the space. I won't name ours just for that sake, but you would use that MDM and to manage all those devices, set those profiles, lock them down, figure out how to with those profiles, specify your device that you're sending traffic to, push certificates to the device, right, so that they can auto authenticate to your wireless that's just student wireless, right? That would be an ideal. So those are examples on the student side. On the business side, and even the teacher side, right? Trying to do your best, again, to remove admin credentials. So I come from a BSD and Solaris and then Linux background, right? So escalating privileges with sudo and stuff like that always made sense to me. And so in the Windows world, really dialing it in and going with laps and making sure that on your servers and different things, those credentials have to be escalated, and then you're removing that privilege when you're done with that work. And that's been a challenge too, because we've had to write some integrations and some tooling, right? Because we've got techs in the field all over, over 34 sites, right, for us. And when they need to escalate privileges, are they in the same labs group, or do we just give them? Do we run an interface to give them a web page that has two-factor auth, that they get the password for that machine? How do you do that stuff? And there's a mixture of homegrown ingenuity combined with enterprise tooling.
Right on. April, I wanted to ask, because we had talked about this before we started. You've got things set up for networking. I'm assuming you're collecting logs of your devices that the end users have. How do you, I mean, Miss Berlin, she works for an MSSP, so, they deal with endpoint, logging all the time. How do you log or keep track of, potential infection vectors or potential infections on, 40, 50,000 endpoints or, enterprise environment like this?
Well, I'm absolutely delighted with my management for being willing to upgrade our Microsoft license to the full E5/A5. It's given us ATP, the full Microsoft ATP suite, which means I have logging of I scare some of the students that I work with on this, because we have logging of everything, every process, every command line, every network connection, anything that the machine does is being tracked in ATP right now. We have the logging turned up all the way, and we collect all of that centrally. So I can actually, when I see a compromised machine, which I saw less than a week ago, I can actually track it back, see which executable was brought on board, from where, what it dropped, where it went, what it tried to do, all kind of like turning back the pages in a book, so I can see what happened a day ago or a week ago.
Nice.
So we have alarms that come up through that system. I can see if some Word document tried to drop a executable. I can see when a port scan starts. I can see all kinds of specialized alerts, and it does a pretty good job of only sending us true alerts and not too many false positives. And the hard part is I've actually had to hire out a company because I need somebody watching my network and those alerts 24/7. The bad guys time their attacks to weekends and holidays when my staff are gone. And so I have to be able to respond and isolate a machine when I'm not in the office.
Okay. I could completely understand that if they know that, you don't have a team in a different time zone or something, after midnight, you're fair game basically, because you're not monitoring it 24/7. So that makes sense. I was going to ask why schools are soft targets, but I think that's pretty much a given. You mentioned, Nathan mentioned bond information. There's a lot of information from people who don't necessarily have credit ratings yet, or there's a lot of educational information there that bad guys would like to automatically start slurping up that data and start using them for attacks or to ruin their credit that they don't have yet. Is that the motivation of the attackers? Is basically not credential grabbing, but identity theft kind of stuff, or is it a different threat?
The stuff that we've seen attacks around tend to be more trying to redirect paychecks, the fraud, and then also an attempt at ransomware. You've seen several districts in this area already having fought that battle. And unfortunately, because we've seen some cities and other orgs pay the ransom,
right.
It's making that worse.
Okay.
Many districts don't actually have social security numbers for students. I mean, they do for staff, right, for payroll, but the students actually, they just get a state student ID, unless they have like special ed or something along those lines where it's actually health services and they're required to have the social on file.
Right. Well, was it always that way, or is that just something that's happened within the last 10 years or so?
I'm not sure if that varies by district. April might know more about that.
I would say 10 years ago, we did have social security numbers. We don't anymore. We haven't for 5 or 6. And in fact, there was, if you do a lookup on it, there was a social security issue with local school districts in Washington, mostly because we were required to provide them to OSPI and the feds. And that data got compromised, well, at least potentially compromised, because the backups of that data were stolen.
I see. Okay.
I've seen some attacks that you mentioned on paychecks as well. If you don't have two-factor on the company system that deal with healthcare companies, that is a target. But let's talk about why are schools soft targets? Do you see attacks on the kids themselves or the kids' computers, and what are the actors after when it comes to the kids' machines?
Mostly the kids just bring it in because they, downloaded a keygen or whatever. It's a lot harder on the Chromebooks for them to do stuff. The policies are pretty locked down and they really don't get to do much of anything on those. But if they bring like a personal device in, we'll see that trying to spread itself out on the network, right? It's scanning. Hopefully we have like API isolation, right, for our guest network, so students' devices can't touch anything. But you see a lot of that kind of stuff. They'll bring in USB drives for sure, plug them into lab machines, and those are infected. We'll see it catch some of that stuff. But we have to expect all of the systems, each of that step to fail, right? So we have the E5 licensing as well with the EDR, and I expect the antivirus to fail. I expect the network segmentation to fail. I expect, myself to fail. We do log everything back into Graylog. I like the quote that Ira Winkler said. He's like, if a user can click on an attachment or run an application and ruin your network sucks. You have to expect everything to fail and create accommodations for that.
Yep.
So you, Nathan, you said you did some network isolation. You've obviously Do you have physical separation? Like, they can only certain switches are only used for certain traffic, or are you even like using VLANs or anything like that? Or are you going like the full isolation from the network?
Yeah, we have several hundred VLANs. As far as when they're on the access points, they're isolated via an Aruba ClearPass for us. But yeah, that's when they're joining into guests. They can't talk to anything except the internet, right? But I think a really important thing to note as we're having all of these discussions is we're large districts and we have those resources and we have those services. If you go to a smaller district, though, they don't have anybody who even understands how to set up a lot of these technologies. So it's an unfair I don't know,
comparison.
Yeah.
So, Jared, I have a question about your technology stack. Each one of you sound like you've picked a different platform. April has Windows. Nathan has a lot of Chromebooks. You have iPads. What was and then I'll go to each one of you, but was there a specific reason why you picked iPads? I know that I read some news stories about Google throwing their weight around and, giving a lot of money to educational institutions to, supply them with this stuff. When I worked in San Diego, I would, go to a local community college and it was full of, Apple iMacs and stuff like that at the time with the ugly purple and blue, things because they were cool. What in terms of vendor management or vendor assessment for security purposes, why the iPads?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting. So at Beaverton, there was an IT director, I think before Nathan was there. His name was Steve Carlson. And so he set up a lot of kind of the infrastructure by what he wanted. He was then the IT director for Ben Lapine for a number of years. And so Beaverton and Bend have many similar things. iPads being one. I know that they've got way more Chromebooks than we do, but they also have iPads as well, and Macs. And so that's a critical thing for us, is that when Steve Carlson came, he was saying, hey, we're going to do Macs. And that was just a decree. And Bend, Oregon is different in that it's affluent. Again, it's another differentiator from a school. Small, big school, small school, affluent district, a district that's struggling, right, to get parent involvement and community dollars. And so luckily for Ben Lapine, we've just always had a ton of community support, and we still do. When we go out for a bond, it passes. And so some of that stuff is just luck. And I would say Macs, being heavily Mac up to this point, has been a great thing for not suffering some of those same Windows-based attacks. But I don't expect that to last. I'm getting a lot more nervous about that as the months go by. And I think that that's kind of a silent thing that's waiting to suddenly be exploited on different organizations at some point here soon.
Okay. April?
Well, so the Windows machines that we have, we do everything that we can to lock them down programmatically, and we decided that we would deploy something that we could manage to the nth degree. The iPads actually turned out to be problematic in a few places. Getting control of the YouTube content turned out to be problematic, and they don't have users that sign in. So tracking traffic to individual kiddos turned out to be quite the challenge for us. We don't prompt kids to log in when they go to the web. We just infer it from the machine that they logged into. And so we were trying to minimize the hassle in the classroom of trying to make kiddos log in to devices that weren't really designed to do that. So we do K1 and 2 for iPads because of the touch and the simple nature of the interface. But pretty much 3 and above is all PCs for us. And that gives us the ability to do quite a few things that any platform has its advantages and disadvantages, but we find that Windows gives us a huge breadth of functionality and control, to be fair. Not to mention, a lot of the remote functionality that we need for imaging and cleanup is also there too.
Okay. Nathan?
Yeah, so we were looking at one-to-one, and I had brought the Chromebooks in as some evaluations. The cost was very, very inexpensive. It was under $200 a unit for us. So cost, and then the limited functionality of it was the other selling point. They were concerned about, gaming devices for the students, if it was powerful enough that they'd just be playing games on it all the time.
Right.
So we, bought into 30,000 Chromebooks initially, and we've now doubled that almost. So the management interface is great. Unfortunately, what's happened over time is Google has really increased the cost of the devices. They've gone up quite a bit as they've added like touchscreens and everything else, but they've also just are now increasing the cost of the licensing for their cloud console. And so that's hitting a lot of districts pretty hard right now too.
Right. Okay. So thank you, Jared, for some of your questions here. It's you said, patching, it must be somewhat nightmarish. How does each of your organizations handle when the newest patches come out, when the new iOS version comes out, or even worse, when you find, there's a new jailbreak for iOS, and now that jailbreak can be used on any iPod or iPad or iDevice that your school system uses to, get around your security controls. What kind of, do you treat that like an incident response when a new jailbreak comes out, or how does that work? We'll start with April this time.
So on my side, we do have some Macs and some iPads, and those are just regularly managed through our MDM. Because we're so large with 100,000 devices, we do things in stages. So we have a group of test schools, elementary, middle, and high. We do the patching there first and almost immediately, and then we wait a week or so after that before we deploy it to the domain at large, in part because we don't want to brick the whole district at once, as you might imagine.
Right.
We're pretty careful with our rollouts in that context. We do pretty much everything by automation. We're still SCCM for our Windows deployment management, and we use an MDM on our iPads and Macs that allow us to do that sort of remote installation management support.
Okay. Nathan?
Yeah, so we actually have 3 different MDMs. Depending on the platform. You can't really manage Chromebooks outside of G Suite. So anybody who has Chromebooks, they're being managed in G Suite. So then we have our Windows devices, which are still Config Manager. And then we have some workloads shifted into Intune and working on that autopilot, setup and all that. And then we use Jamf for managing the Macs, which we have about 10,000 Macs, and then another 20,000 or so iOS devices too that are managed in there. So we're a very large Jamf infrastructure.
Goodness. All right. Jared, how about you?
Yeah, it's pretty similar. I would say that we definitely struggle with getting to probably that tipping point of trying to align everybody with the patching schedule, right? So with something that's, if Windows drops a new server patch, for example, or, Windows Tuesday update type of thing, right? We have a GPO that just applies that to a lot of our baseline servers automatically because we can trust the software stacks on there. But in education, and we've also got these software stacks that are running multiple layers of emulation to ultimately run a piece of COBOL code, right? That stuff exists in education. I'm sure it exists everywhere, but that's 40-year-old code that's running. And if we just blatantly apply the patch, all of a sudden we can't do day-to-day business because it just destroys that stack. So it's definitely a challenge there for those types of situations. For the end user devices, we generally do a NAG, which another engineer wrote and created, which I think is really awesome. I when he rolled it out to my machine, I really appreciated it because even I can get caught up in not wanting to restart. But the NAG goes out to our teachers too to say, hey, this is the 7th NAG and this is the 6th, right? And the NAG just takes place after, I think, 30 days or something like that if it's not CV of, a security patch of something. So again, some homegrown, some home-baked stuff, and then the MDM stuff that Nathan's talking about, we use that stack as well. And we've got actually about the same amount of devices. But the challenge then again becomes we're at that tipping point where we don't have as many engineers who can do all that stuff. So we're trying to codify your DevSecOps, if you want to call it that type of stuff, is the only way you can scale, especially in K-12. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have some scripts to reproduce it, you're never going to do it again. So we're trying to apply those types of things to our entire infrastructure.
Cool.
Yeah, and I kind of left out we apply everything within 14 days generally, but we do it all in rings, as April mentioned. One of the things I did bring up was state testing is rather interesting. So When state testing is going, we can potentially break the testing by applying certain patches. So, and the tester will actually say, we don't support Chrome OS this version. So we actually have to hold the devices back until testing is completed, which leaves us vulnerable. So, it's really hard.
So when you have state testing like that, do they come to you and go, okay, state testing's coming up, we're only going to use, Chrome 9 or something like that. And we're like, well, we've already upgraded to 10. Do you have to force downgrades? Is that even possible?
Nope, you can't.
Okay. So April, Jared, do any of you ever come with, vendors and they're like, oh, we're using, this version because it's old and because that's the standard across other systems. And it's like, oh, we only use Windows 7 and oh, well, we're already on 10
Flash.
And it won't work. Right. We use Flash. Oh God, we use Flash. Do you still have Flash, y'all's environment?
Java.
And there are, Flash and Java both in some older educational apps.
I just killed Flash and Java, the last one this year. So
God bless you, sir.
We're working on that. You're ahead of us.
God bless you, sir.
And to be fair, I will say vendors are a liability for us in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah. That was another way I was going to be heading here with regards to vendors. How do you do assessments of vendors, or is it, pretty much the vendor takes the superintendent of the schools to lunch and automatically you've got this brand new Flash app?
I wouldn't say it's quite that bad.
That's awesome.
Well, it happens in our world, in the InfoSec world, where it's like, this is crap. CISO gets taken to lunch, and then you've got, the Gartner approved whatever app. So I just wondered how it works for y'all.
Shiny things do sometimes come that way through executives, but most of the time we actually have a formal evaluation process now, because we have to look at the privacy implications of what we bring on board. So we're looking at the EULA, we're looking at the privacy agreement, we're looking at how they manage the student data, that the data belongs to us, that we can demand that the data be deleted, and that they have processes and controls around it, because our vendors are in some ways how some education data is getting owned now.
Do you audit your vendors?
We do. Sometimes we have a formal audit requirement. And sometimes it's informal, but we are definitely holding our vendors to account legally through multiple, every new contract that comes up, or any contract that comes up for renewal, we now make sure that all of the appropriate modules are added so that we have those controls.
And I think the key point there is putting it in the contract, right? Access for Learning, A4L.org, has some great frameworks. They manage a lot of the privacy stuff. And so we've partnered with them, as a lot of districts in the area do. So that's a really cool resource to kind of vet applications, and they can kind of get approved for privacy policies across the board for all districts if they agree to some of that stuff. So
I think again, the way we're all talking here, it sharply drops off, right? People are struggling down with the smaller districts to just trying to grapple with any of this stuff. So we are blessed that we actually have some of these luxuries to actually accomplish this stuff.
That is true. There's, at least in Washington, we're trying to come up with a universal contract that has all of those bells and whistles in it, that once we've signed that contract, little districts can tack on and use it. Without having to go through the same level of work. It's been sort of pre-authorized in a way.
Now, you say you've been blessed, but really that's relative. You're in the grand scheme of things, you're not. You're still struggling, right, for resources and funding.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I try to be an optimist, right? I try to say that I could look at all the problems that we have and say that I'm not going to try to do anything about it, or I can say, hey, these are the good things I got going for us, and I'll operate from that perspective. But you're absolutely right. We are vastly under-resourced, like April was saying.
Yeah, one of the other interesting things in education, you get these teachers who spin off their own education app, right? Because it was something that they wanted to have available when they were teaching. Well, your CASB doesn't catch those. CASBs are designed for enterprise, right? So I'm sitting there watching all the applications people are using, and we have absolutely zero insight into some of these education applications that they're using, because there's 300 users of it and nobody's ever classified it before.
And that was it for part one of our discussion with April Mardock and Nathan and Jay Folk about school security. We thank them for joining us for part one. Part two, we'll go further in depth about the resources they have available to them, or what they don't have available to them. So we also talk a little bit about some IoT and tablet-based issues that they're having as well for devices and that. So thank you to all of our patrons for continuing to support us during the times that we're having. As we always say, the podcast will always be free, but we appreciate them for going that extra mile to support the show, support the education, and that we try to give out every week, new content, what have you. We are also very thankful to all of the people who support us on Twitter and in our Slack channels. If you're interested in joining the Slack channel, you can always DM us or send us an email, bds.podcast@gmail.com. Our Twitter handle is @Brakesec on Twitter. I'm Brian Brake on Twitter. You can follow me there. Miss Berlin, you can find her at InfoSister, and Mr. Betcher can be found at Betcher Pwned. If you cannot give to our tip jar on Patreon, we have a number of other ways that you can help out. We're on various platforms that have feedback enabled. So if you are on Pandora or Spotify, or you enjoy iTunes, or you use the Google Play Store or iHeartRadio or SoundCloud or what have you, please leave some feedback on those. All 5 minutes of text on a network like that would give us more exposure, give us a better search engine algorithm optimization thing, or just get more people to see our podcast and help out. So we appreciate anything you can do with that on any of those platforms. Also have a store, our TeePublic store, if you would like to go ahead and buy a t-shirt. That's another way you can help support us. We get a little kickback from t-shirts or mugs or stickers, since people can't go to conferences. Miss Berlin and Mr. Betcher and I, we can't make it to conferences. Sticker swap is always available on the TeePub store. You can download get a sticker from the TeePub store. That's brakesec.com/store. Of course, our podcast website is breakingsecurity.com, BRAKEING security.com. And that was it for the week. If you are feeling a little under the weather, or you feel like you need somebody to talk to, please hit up our Slack. We do have a mental health channel. Miss Berlin has Hackers Health. I know she's doing a lot of online virtual stuff at this time, which is, of course, 28th of March. You can always check to see what she's doing online. That may not always be the case, depending on when you're listening to this, but right now, with everything going virtual, she is definitely having regular meetups or discussions, and there's a lot of virtual stuff going on, conferences and what have you. Please take advantage of those if you can. So that was it. Have a great week. Be kind to one another on social media. Be kind to one another in person, even if it is 1.8 meters or 6 feet away. Take care of yourself, of course, because you are the only you have, and somebody is depending on you, I would imagine. So please take care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you again soon.